Miles from the nearest road, Emily's boots pressed against the soft, loamy earth, leaving prints that vanished as soon as she lifted her foot. She had expected silence, yes, but this was different. The usual symphony of the woods, birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant hum of a stream, was gone, smothered as though the world itself had swallowed it. Even the wind, moving through the upper branches, produced no rustle. It bent the trees, shifted the leaves, but made no sound. Her own breathing sounded foreign. She tried to whistle, a short, tentative note, but it faded almost immediately, as though the forest sucked it into the canopy above. Panic fluttered against her ribs. Emily stopped, pressing a hand against a tree trunk. The bark was rough, cool beneath her palm, grounding. She whispered, her voice quivering, "Hello!" No answer, no echo, not even the faint reflection of her own words. She tried again, louder this time, and only a hollow absence greeted her. She could feel the forest pressing in from all sides, dense and patient, as if listening. She lifted her head. The trees above were impossibly tall, their branches interwoven so tightly that only dim shards of pale light filtered through. The forest smelled wet and earthy, heavy with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. The silence seemed to thicken the air itself, pressing down on her shoulders. Her boots crunched lightly on a thin layer of dead leaves, yet the sound didn't travel. She bent to pick up a twig and snapped it sharply. Again, nothing. Even the small snap, which would normally punctuate the quiet, vanished instantly, swallowed by the canopy. Her pulse quickened. Emily spun slowly in place, trying to map the environment. The trees repeated themselves, trunks and shadows folding into one another in disorienting, impossible patterns. She took a cautious step forward and stopped abruptly. Her footfall made no impression on the air around her. No vibration, no sound, nothing to mark her presence. She could see her footprints on the wet soil, pale impressions, yet they seemed unreal, disconnected from the act of walking. The deeper she ventured, the more oppressive the quiet became. She tried humming, at first softly, then louder. Her own voice felt alien, a faint, imperceptible vibration that dissipated before it reached her ears. It was not just sound that had been stolen, her connection to it, the feedback she relied on to orient herself, had been severed. Branches overhead swayed, brushing against each other in a delicate, impossible choreography. Yet the movement produced no noise. The air moved, shifting and brushing her face, but it carried nothing. No scent of pine, no soft hiss of leaves, no whisper of wind. She felt unmoored, like a puppet untethered from its strings. The forest a dark ocean in which she floated, weightless and deaf. Emily tried calling out again. "Is anyone?" Her voice seemed to stretch and thin, fading before it left her mouth. The words never fully formed, and the silence around her swallowed what little remained. She stumbled over a root, reaching for balance, and realized that even her small gasp of surprise was muted, as if her body no longer belonged to the same space as her perception. She stopped, crouching behind a low outcropping of mossy rocks. Her hands trembled. She tried to focus on small details, anything to maintain a sense of reality. The rough texture of bark under her fingers, the damp weight of fallen leaves, the jagged pattern of lichen on stone. But the forest resisted her attention, swallowing everything that might anchor her senses. It was not merely silent. It was anticipatory, aware, reacting subtly to her presence. She felt eyes upon her, though there were no creatures in sight. Even birds, squirrels, insects, all the life that should animate a forest, were absent, as if they had been recalled or had never existed. Emily moved cautiously, testing the forest's boundaries. Each step felt wrong. She reached for her map and compass, but the compass needle quivered wildly, as if the magnetic field itself was unstable. She dropped it, the clatter suppressed, and looked around. Nothing, not even a shadow. The light was dim and mottled, filtered through the impossibly dense canopy, creating shifting patterns that seemed to pulse and warp in tandem with her unease. Time seemed to stretch. She tried counting her steps, but the forest absorbed her sense of distance and motion. She thought she had walked for minutes, maybe hours, but when she glanced behind, the path looked unbroken, undisturbed. Every turn she took seemed to fold back on itself, returning her to the same patch of mossy stones, the same tree with the long, dangling branch that scratched at her shoulder yet made no sound. A faint echo appeared, or what she thought was an echo. It was the brush of air, a hollow vibration against the tree trunks, repeating with almost imperceptible delay. It was not her own movement. It mimicked something else, a rhythm slightly out of phase with her own heartbeat. She froze. The forest seemed to lean closer, the canopy shifting imperceptibly, as if it breathed with her, imitating her, waiting. She whispered again, barely a breath, trying to convince herself, "Hello? I'm here. Please." Her voice vanished instantly, absorbed before reaching the air. And then she thought she heard a response. Not words, but a sound like the soft exhalation of many lungs, layered together, echoing her whisper yet impossible to place. Her skin pricked with goosebumps. She tried speaking again, louder, clearer, but the forest held nothing, compressing the air around her into a vacuum. Emily turned in a slow circle. Every tree looked the same, every shadow the same. Her boots pressed the soil, leaving prints she could see. Yet there was no sound, no trail of her passage, no confirmation that she existed outside her own awareness. And then, just for a moment, a snapping twig, faint and deliberate, somewhere just beyond her sight. She froze, straining, but there was nothing. The twig never fell. The sound never arrived. It was suggestion, perhaps, a projection of her fear into the forest's engineered silence. Panic began to build, slow and insidious, curling in her stomach and climbing her throat. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, though even that felt hollow, disconnected. She tried to run, but the forest resisted her instinct. Every step brought no progress. Each rustle, each imagined sound, each breath gone. The forest was a space of absence, a vacuum, a mirror reflecting her own panic back at her in unnatural, silent rhythms. And then she realized the forest had learned her patterns, her hesitations, her movements, the rhythm of her breathing. It all informed the way it held itself. It was not merely dead or silent. It was aware. It observed. It curated the quiet to match her own fragility, absorbing the world's sound so that she could not anchor herself to anything real. She was isolated not just by distance but by perception. She whispered once more, almost a plea, "Please." This time, the faintest vibration, a delicate shiver of air, returned. Not words, not a voice, something that might have been a response or her own mind tricked beyond measure. Her pulse raced. The forest seemed to hum in tandem with her thoughts, subtle, alive, waiting. Emily stopped. She pressed her palm against the mossy trunk of a tree, feeling the faint vibration beneath her hand. The forest was breathing with her, listening, holding, and as she lowered herself to the earth, the quiet settled deeper around her, pressing down, heavier than gravity, more absolute than nightfall. A sudden understanding rose in her chest, cold and suffocating. She could leave the forest, but the forest would not leave her. The silence had become part of her awareness, part of her perception. Every sound she made, every thought she held, would be absorbed, reshaped, returned to her muted, altered, never fully real again. She whispered into the void, "I see you," and the forest answered, not with sound, but with a weightless, absolute quiet that pressed into her mind and never released. The canopy above shifted slightly, a single shaft of gray light falling onto the damp earth. Emily blinked, and she understood, in a bone-deep way, that the silence was not emptiness. It was waiting, patient, infinite. John's eyes fluttered open to the damp morning air, the mist curling around the trunks of pines like ghostly fingers. He blinked against the faint gray light, then froze. The sleeping bag that had been to his right, the one where Maya always slept, was now at the far end of the campsite. and hers was at the head of the fire pit, zipped shut, facing the wrong way. He sat up slowly, muscles stiff from the cold, and inhaled. The scent of pine and wet earth filled his lungs, sharp and raw, but beneath it something else lingered. A faint trace of smoke, or perhaps the lingering warmth of the fire from last night, disturbed. His pulse quickened. Maya! His voice came out flat, swallowed by the thick fog that blanketed the clearing. He reached for the sleeping bag beside him. Empty. She stirred behind the fire pit, murmuring something incoherent, rubbing her eyes. John, you awake? He nodded, trying to keep his voice calm. Yeah. We moved? Maya blinked at him. Confusion etched across her face. Moved what? He pointed vaguely at the sleeping bags. Everything. The bags. The fire pit. The logs. It's all different. She frowned and scrambled out of her bag, mist curling around her hair like smoke. I swear we left it like last night. Her words caught in her throat as she scanned the clearing. The fire pit, which had been carefully stacked, now had logs partially collapsed, the ash disturbed. Small indentations in the soil suggested someone, or something, had been sitting on the edge. John swallowed, suddenly aware of the sharp chill in the damp morning. The dew had coated their gear, the sleeping bags heavy with moisture, yet each one seemed oddly freshly fluffed, as if someone had handled them overnight. His fingers brushed his own bag, and it felt off. Not like he remembered, compressed differently, a ridge where there shouldn't have been. He rose slowly, boots squishing against the saturated earth. The fog made the forest around them dense and indistinct. Shadows of tree trunks stretched at impossible angles, bending and quivering like dark smoke. He scanned the perimeter. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed, aside from the fog itself. Did you hear anything? He asked. His voice sounded foreign in the stillness, echoing faintly against the mist, but only for a second before silence swallowed it again. Maya shook her head. I know. I thought maybe a raccoon or something, but… She trailed off, eyes narrowing as she noticed footprints in the damp earth. They didn't belong to either of them. Too small, irregular, some shallow, some deep, leading from the treeline to the fire pit and back again. No pattern, no destination. John followed the trail with his gaze, the hairs on his arms prickling. He had been hiking this forest for years, and he knew the sounds and smells of its wildlife. But here now it felt wrong. The usual symphony, the drip of dew, the distant call of birds, was absent. Only the faint crunch of their boots on wet needles and leaves punctuated the thick, oppressive quiet. He crouched to inspect the footprints. They were too small for him, too light for Maya, yet disturbingly precise, pressed into the ground as if someone had tested the pressure of each step. And every so often, the print would stop abruptly, as if the walker had been aware of being watched and paused. Maya was crouched beside him, brushing the fog from her hair. Her hands trembled slightly. We didn't leave the bags like this, she whispered. I remember the circle we made around the fire. We always make a circle. That's the rule. John nodded, tension coiling in his stomach. Yeah, exactly. Circle. But look! He gestured to the logs, which had shifted slightly overnight. Small embers still smoldered at the center, but the perimeter of stones was disturbed. One tilted at an impossible angle, as if someone had leaned over it. A sudden snap of a branch from deeper in the forest made them both start. John's heart hammered. He strained his ears, but nothing followed. Not a rustle, not a snap, not even the faintest whisper of wind. The forest seemed to absorb sound, or perhaps it had never existed here at all. Just blank emptiness punctuated by their own movements. Someone's out there, Maya breathed, eyes wide. Maybe, John said cautiously. Or maybe it's just us, sleepwalking or something. The fog messes with your head. Maya shook her head. No, I feel it. I never sleepwalk. They stood in the damp clearing, eyes scanning the foggy treeline, but it remained an impossible uniform gray. The footprints ended at the base of a tree, abruptly, as if the walker had vanished into the mist. No twigs broken, no leaves disturbed, nothing but the empty fog. John's mind raced. They were alone, right? Just the two of them, miles from the nearest trail. But the rearrangement, the sleeping bags, the fire pit, the subtle disarray suggested otherwise, or something else entirely. He bent down to touch Maya's sleeping bag at the fire pit. The fabric was damp, compressed unnaturally, warm where it shouldn't have been, as if someone or something had lain there recently. His stomach tightened. Maya's voice was trembling. I keep thinking I see shapes in the fog, but it's not anything solid. Just shifting. Watching. John nodded slowly. He had the same feeling, a pressure in the mist, a subtle sense that the forest itself had conspired while they slept. The air felt heavier, denser, as if each inhale drew not only cold moisture but something else. Awareness. Intent. They moved cautiously, inspecting the remaining sleeping bags. Each one had shifted slightly, edges folded, corners tucked, even straps twisted in ways they hadn't left them. Nothing overtly violent, nothing obviously aggressive, just rearranged. Tidy, precise, observant. John swallowed, heart pounding. It's like someone wanted us to notice, but not see. Maya nodded, shivering. Yes, like it's watching, testing. The fog pressed closer, curling around their boots and ankles. Small droplets clung to eyelashes and hair, the forest exhaling damp and earthy. Every shadow felt like it was moving when they weren't looking, and every sound was absent. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the oppressive stillness of the forest. John took a step toward the treeline, wanting desperately to break the spell, to find the source, to reassure themselves it was nothing. But the footprints repeated behind them now, faintly visible in the damp soil, leading back toward the fire pit, then disappearing again, as if retracing paths they themselves had made. Maya touched his arm. We should pack up. Now. He nodded, voice caught in his throat. They moved mechanically, folding sleeping bags and packing gear, the mist curling around their movements like tendrils. And all the while, John couldn't shake the feeling that with each motion, the forest observed, calculated, and waited. When they finished, they stepped back to survey the campsite. The sleeping bags, now packed, looked as they had before, but the memory of the rearrangement, the precision, the unnatural quiet, lingered. John's eyes flicked to the fog, dense and opaque, and for a moment he could have sworn he saw a slight movement. Just a hint, a subtle curve of shadow at the edge of vision. They began the trek back to the trail, the mist swallowing their footprints as if the earth itself had no memory of them. But the image of the sleeping bags, how they had been shifted, observed, manipulated, clung to their minds. And John understood, with a cold certainty, that whatever had rearranged them had not left. It had waited, and it would wait again.